David Lynch is an artist of contradictions. He is a filmmaker, painter, musician, and writer who has crafted some of modern cinema's most surreal, disturbing, and beautiful images. His work oscillates between the nightmarish and the idyllic, blending horror with wonder in a way few can replicate. But behind the cryptic narratives and dreamlike sequences is a man who insists that his life is pretty standard, a statement that seems almost impossible given the worlds he creates. Room to Dream explores both sides of Lynch, the enigmatic artist and the profoundly personal storyteller. This book is structured in a way that mirrors the duality of Lynch himself. Kristine McKenna provides a well-researched, detailed biography of his life, chronicling his upbringing, struggles, triumphs, and artistic evolution. Following each biographical section, Lynch reflects on these events, offering his memories, interpretations, and insights. The result is a unique fusion of external observation and internal experience, one that allows readers not just to see who Lynch is, but to feel how he sees the world. Lynch has always described himself as an artist first and a filmmaker second. His passion for painting and the visual arts led him to experiment with moving images, ultimately guiding him into the world of cinema. His earliest influences stem from his childhood in small-town America, where seemingly mundane details would later manifest as unsettling, yet fascinating themes in his work. This is the foundation of Room to Dream, a journey into the mind of an artist who has spent his life pursuing creativity in its purest form. Boise, Idaho, 1946 to 1954. David Lynch was born on January 20th, 1946 in Missoula, Montana, but in Boise, Idaho, where he spent the formative years of his childhood. His father, Donald Walton Lynch, was a research scientist for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, specializing in tree diseases, and his mother, Edwina Sonny Lynch, was an English tutor. The Lynch family lived a typical suburban life, moving from town to town due to Donald's work, which meant young David was often uprooted and placed in new environments. Despite his upbringing's seeming normalcy, Lynch's childhood memories carry an undercurrent of mystery and strangeness. At the time, Boise had tree-lined streets, friendly neighbors, and an all-American sense of security. But for Lynch, shadows lurked beneath the surface. He recalls seeing a woman walking down the street covered in blood, a striking image that would later find echoes in Blue Velvet. David's parents encouraged creativity, but in a structured manner. His mother refused to buy him coloring books to guide his artistic instincts, believing they stifled creativity by forcing children to stay within the lines. Instead, she gave him blank sheets of paper and pencils, allowing him the freedom to create his worlds. This small but significant gesture left a lasting impression on Lynch, shaping how he would approach art for the rest of his life. As a child, Lynch was fascinated with textures, colors, and forms long before he understood their significance. He would sit in his backyard staring at the trees for hours, captivated by how the light shifted through the leaves. Nature held a deep sense of wonder for him, but there was also something unsettling about it, a theme that would later appear in films like Twin Peaks, where idyllic small towns hide dark secrets. Lynch's early friendships also shaped his artistic mind. One of his closest childhood friends was Toby Keeler, whose father was an artist. It was through Keeler's family that Lynch first encountered painting as a severe discipline. He would spend hours in their home, fascinated by the creation process, watching the older Keeler work with oils and canvas. It was a world he wanted to be part of. David Lynch's reflections. I remember Boise as this remarkable place. It was like the world was entirely of promise. Big yards, blue skies, and many places to explore. But even then I could feel there was something underneath it all. It's like the way a dream can be beautiful and terrifying at the same time. You don't always know why. It just is. One of my strongest memories from Boise is when I was young and I saw this woman walking down the street, naked, covered in blood. I remember just standing there watching her. She wasn't screaming or crying, she was walking. And that image, that feeling, it never left me. It wasn't just about the horror of it. It was about the mystery. Who was she? Where was she going? What had happened? I think that's why a lot of my work is the way it is. It's not just about fear, it's about the unknown. My mom, she was so great. She had this way of encouraging me without pushing me. She wouldn't buy me coloring books. She said, "Draw your lines." And that was a big deal. It taught me early on that there are no actual rules in art, just the ones you make for yourself. As a kid, I spent a lot of time looking at trees, shadows, and how people moved. There was something about it, like the world was giving you secrets if you just paid attention. I didn't know it then, but that's where my love for images started. Not just pictures, but the feelings you get from them. My best friend back then was Toby Keeler. His dad was an artist, and I thought that was the coolest thing in the world. I'd watch him mix paints, stretch canvas, and make something out of nothing. I didn't know what I wanted to be back then, but seeing that made me want to make things. It made me want to live in that world of colors and shapes. David Lynch's early years in Boise were filled with wonder and subtle eeriness. His childhood was standard on the surface but filled with moments that left a lasting impact on his artistic sensibilities. His mother's encouragement of free-form creativity, fascination with nature and mystery, and introduction to painting through the Keeler family became foundational elements of his artistic journey. These early experiences would later manifest in his films, where he blends the beautiful with the unsettling, the ordinary with the surreal. Lynch acknowledges that while his childhood was light, a shadow was always creeping at the edges, an element of the unknown that made the world feel magical and deeply strange. It is within this duality that his art was born. Spokane, Washington, 1955 to 1960. When David Lynch was 9, his family relocated to Spokane, Washington. The move was one of many transitions in his young life, but Spokane left a powerful impression on him. Here, Lynch became more independent, exploring the town and engaging in activities that would shape his creative mind. Spokane was different from Boise, bigger, slightly rougher, and less idyllic. Lynch recalled a mix of wholesome suburban life and unexpected moments of darkness. He became more aware of the contrast between normalcy and the strange undercurrents beneath the surface, an observation that would become a hallmark of his storytelling. In Spokane, Lynch's fascination with film began to take root. He and his friends rode bikes to local theaters, watching horror movies, westerns, and early science fiction. These films ignited something in him, the ability to move images to create immersive, emotional experiences. Lynch's school years in Spokane were a mix of creative exploration and frustration with traditional education. He was never an influential student, feeling confined by the rigid structures of school. Instead, he sought out his forms of learning, drawing, daydreaming, and observing life around him. His sketchbooks from this time are filled with eerie, dreamlike images, reflecting his growing artistic instincts. Lynch also began to develop an appreciation for music during these years. The sounds of rock and roll were sweeping across America, and Spokane was no exception. He would spend hours listening to records, mesmerized by the power of sound to evoke emotion, a passion that would later influence the unique sound design in his films. David Lynch's reflections. I loved Spokane, but it had a weirdness to it. It wasn't just one thing, there were these moments. Little things that made you feel like you were in a different world. It's hard to explain, but it's a feeling I've carried with me ever since. Alexandria, Virginia, 1960 to 1964. At the age of 14, David Lynch and his family moved once again, this time to Alexandria, Virginia. This move was particularly jarring for Lynch. Unlike the small-town familiarity of Boise and the slightly rougher but still manageable world of Spokane, Alexandria was closer to Washington, D.C. and had a more urban, structured feel. The transition to a new school, new friends, and a new environment proved challenging for a young Lynch, who had always thrived on freedom and creative exploration. Lynch enrolled at Francis C. Hammond High School, a large traditional public school emphasizing discipline and academic achievement. From the beginning, Lynch struggled with the rigid structure of formal education. He found classes uninspiring and was more interested in spending time outside, sketching, or exploring the town. His grades reflected his disinterest. He often daydreamed in class, imagining other worlds and abstract ideas rather than focusing on the lessons. Despite his academic struggles, Alexandria provided Lynch with two things that would shape his future: a deepened love for visual art and the introduction to lifelong friendships that would later play key roles in his career. During this period, Lynch became close friends with Jack Fisk, a fellow student interested in painting and the arts. The two bonded over their shared passion and later collaborated on multiple projects. Fisk eventually became a renowned production designer and worked on some of Lynch's most iconic films, including Eraserhead and Mulholland Drive. Another pivotal moment in Lynch's life was his exposure to the Art Students League of Washington, a small art school where he took painting classes. He quickly realized that art, particularly painting, was his true calling. Unlike the structured confines of high school, the Art Students League provided an environment where he could express himself freely. There, Lynch began experimenting with different painting techniques, embracing abstraction and surrealism. He was particularly inspired by the works of Francis Bacon, whose grotesque, distorted imagery resonated with Lynch's growing fascination with the dark undercurrents of everyday life. While supportive of his artistic interests, his parents remained pragmatic. Donald Lynch, a scientist, was particularly concerned about his son's lack of interest in academics and his increasingly obsessive focus on art. Edwina, though more encouraging, also worried about his future. Their discussions often centered on whether he could make a living as an artist, but Lynch remained steadfast in his belief that he had to pursue his passion at any cost. David Lynch's reflections. Moving to Alexandria was different. I didn't like school. I hated being told what to do in a classroom all day. It felt like a prison. But outside of school, I found this whole other world. Art, friends, freedom. That's what saved me. Jack Fisk and I hit it off right away. He was just as into painting as I was, and we'd spend hours talking about colors, textures, and shapes. It was the first time I felt like I'd found someone who understood the world I wanted to be in. And later, when we started working on films together, it was just an extension of that. Two people building something weird and wonderful together. My parents were worried, my dad especially. He was a scientist and didn't understand how a person could make a life out of painting. He wanted me to focus on school, get good grades, and attend college. But I didn't care about any of that. I just wanted to make things. And when I found the Art Students League, that was it. That's when I started to feel like an artist. The smell of paint and the studio's energy was magic. The beginning of a new artistic vision. During his time in Alexandria, Lynch's artistic sensibilities began to solidify. He developed an obsession with texture, thick layers of paint, rough surfaces, unconventional materials. He wanted his paintings to feel alive, almost like they had movement within them. He experimented with incorporating everyday objects into his artwork, a technique that foreshadowed his later film's surreal, tactile quality. It was also during this time that Lynch had one of the most pivotal moments of his life, his first brush with the idea of film as a medium for artistic expression. One evening, while working late at the Art Students League, he glanced at a blank canvas, and for the first time, he imagined it moving. The thought was electric. Until then, Lynch had seen painting as a static form of expression, but now he was struck by the idea that images could shift and evolve. This realization planted the seed for what would eventually become his transition from painting to filmmaking. Lynch also began developing an interest in unconventional storytelling. He would sketch out strange, fragmented narratives, disjointed images of people and places that didn't quite connect yet carried a haunting logic. These sketches were like stills from a film that didn't yet exist, and though he didn't fully realize it at the time, they were early prototypes of the dreamlike narratives that would define his filmmaking career. Rebellion and restlessness. As Lynch's love for art grew, so did his restlessness. He resented the time he had to spend at school and began skipping classes more frequently. He spent entire days wandering through the city, exploring back alleys, abandoned buildings, and odd little shops that seemed frozen in time. The town itself fascinated him, not the grand, polished monuments of Washington, D.C., but the quiet, decaying corners of Alexandria where mystery seemed to linger. At night, he and his friends would gather in basements or garages, listening to music and discussing art. The rise of rock and roll was in full swing, and Lynch was captivated by the music's raw energy. He particularly loved Elvis Presley, whose voice seemed to echo a world of rebellion, passion, and strange beauty. Music was starting to influence his artistic vision in ways he didn't yet understand, but he knew it was necessary. During this time, Lynch also experienced the darker side of life. For all the beauty and excitement he found in art, there were moments of real fear and unease. He remembers witnessing a fight in a dark alley, the sound of flesh hitting flesh, the low, menacing murmurs of men whose faces were hidden in the shadows. He didn't intervene. He just watched, absorbing every detail. These moments of everyday violence, of sudden shifts from normalcy to chaos, would later become a signature element in his films. The decision to leave. By the time Lynch reached his senior year of high school, it was clear that traditional education wasn't for him. His grades were poor, but he didn't care. He had already decided he was going to be an artist. His parents, though still concerned, ultimately accepted his choice. With their reluctant blessing, he decided to attend the School of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. It was a turning point. Alexandria had been a place of frustration and discovery, where Lynch had felt trapped but also awakened to his artistic potential. As he prepared to leave, he felt relief and anticipation. He didn't know exactly what the future held, but he knew one thing: he was done with school and ready to create. David Lynch's final reflections on Alexandria. Alexandria was where I figured it out. I didn't like school, I didn't like the rules, but I loved painting and knew that was what I wanted to do. Everything else, grades, expectations, plans, they didn't matter. I just wanted to be in a studio, making things. That's all I ever wanted. But it wasn't just art. The feeling of the place, the alleys, the music, the weird little moments made me stop and think. That's what stayed with me. That's what still shows up in everything I do. I often think about that. You don't always know what's important until later. I thought I was just a kid who didn't fit in. But really, I was collecting things. Images, feelings, ideas. Alexandria was full of them. I didn't know yet what I would do with them. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, 1965 to 1970. 1965, David Lynch moved to Philadelphia to attend the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, PAFA. This defining period in his life would push his creativity into darker, more experimental territories, and lay the groundwork for his transition from painting to filmmaking. Philadelphia in the mid-1960s was a city of contrasts. It had a rich cultural and artistic heritage, but it was also a city in decline, filled with crime, decay, and a sense of unease that permeated its streets. Lynch, who had spent his childhood in relatively peaceful suburban environments, was suddenly thrust into a chaotic, unpredictable, and, at times, outright dangerous world. Lynch, who married Peggy Reevey in 1967, lived with his first wife in a low-rent section of the city. Their apartment was in a rough neighborhood surrounded by abandoned buildings, poverty, and crime. The atmosphere of the town left a lasting impact on him. He later described Philadelphia as a place of fear, insanity, corruption, and despair, and those elements would become central themes in much of his later work. The Academy and Artistic Evolution. Despite the bleak environment, Lynch thrived at PAFA. Unlike the rigid academic structure of high school, the Academy encouraged free expression and experimentation. Here, he met like-minded artists, including Jack Fisk, who had also enrolled at PAFA. Fisk later became a major collaborator on Lynch's films, designing the surreal, textured worlds of Eraserhead, The Straight Story, and Mulholland Drive. Lynch's artwork during this period became increasingly unconventional. He started working with thick textures, mixing organic materials like dead insects and hair into his paintings to create eerie, tactile surfaces. His fascination with decay and transformation deepened, as did his interest in surrealism. The chaotic energy of Philadelphia, its cracked sidewalks, crumbling buildings, and flickering streetlights, found its way into his art. At PAFA, Lynch had one of the most significant revelations of his career. One evening, as he was working late in his studio, he had a vision. He looked at one of his paintings and imagined it moving. The thought electrified him. Until then, he had only worked in still images, but now he realized that motion could add a new dimension to his art. This moment planted the seed for his transition to filmmaking. First steps into film. Inspired by his vision of moving paintings, Lynch created his first short film, 6 Men Getting Sick, 6 times, in 1967. It was a 1-minute looping animation projected onto a sculpted relief, blending painting and film into a disturbing piece. The short was a visceral, experimental work featuring grotesque, distorted figures vomiting repeatedly. a nightmarish vision that set the tone for much of Lynch's future work. Encouraged by the experience, Lynch decided to delve deeper into film. He borrowed a 16mm camera and began working on his next short, The Alphabet, 1968, a surreal and unsettling combination of live action and animation. The film was inspired by a nightmare Peggy Reeves' niece had about the alphabet attacking her, and it reflected Lynch's growing fascination with dream logic and psychological horror. Philadelphia provided endless inspiration for these early films. Lynch often spoke about his eerie experiences while living in the city, encounters with violent neighbors, unsettling noises at night, and the general feeling that something malevolent was always lurking just beyond the surface. He recalled witnessing a woman being brutally attacked outside his apartment and feeling both horrified and mesmerized by the sheer rawness of the moment. These experiences seeped into his work, culminating in The Grandmother, 1970, a 34-minute film about a neglected boy who grows a grandmother from a seed to escape his abusive parents. The film's mix of live action and animation was deeply unsettling, blending the grotesque with the profoundly emotional, a style that would later define Eraserhead. Darkness, fear, and transformation. An almost constant sense of unease marked Lynch's time in Philadelphia. He described the city as a place where he could hear people screaming at night, where crime and violence were common, and where the air itself felt thick with tension. This period instilled in him a lifelong obsession with the interplay between beauty and horror, normalcy and terror. Despite these challenges, Lynch found strange artistic freedom in the city's chaos. The decayed industrial landscapes, the strange flickering streetlights, and the eerie quiet of certain alleyways fascinated him. He saw beauty in the decay, grime, and weird, haunting details of the world around him. This fascination would later translate into the dystopian, industrial aesthetic of Eraserhead. During this time, Lynch also developed a deep appreciation for sound design. The constant background noise of the city, dripping pipes, distant sirens, humming electrical wires, became a source of inspiration. He began experimenting with ambient sounds, layering different noises to create unsettling atmospheres. This attention to sound would later become one of his signature filmmaking techniques, used masterfully in Eraserhead, Twin Peaks, and Mulholland Drive. Personal struggles and growth. While Lynch was creatively thriving, his personal life was more turbulent. His marriage to Peggy Reeves was strained due to financial instability and Lynch's growing obsession with his art. They had a daughter, Jennifer Lynch, in 1968, but the pressures of young parenthood, coupled with Lynch's all-consuming creative drive, created tension in their relationship. Money was always tight. Lynch took odd jobs to support his family, including working as a printer and cleaning an abandoned city morgue. These jobs, though mundane, added to his experiences of urban decay and the grotesque, elements that would later appear in Eraserhead. The decision to leave Philadelphia. By 1970, Lynch knew it was time to move on. Philadelphia had given him everything it could. It had shaped his artistic vision, introduced him to filmmaking, and instilled a deep understanding of fear and unease. But it had also drained him. The constant tension, the financial struggles, and the increasing sense of isolation were becoming overwhelming. He applied to the American Film Institute's Center for Advanced Film Studies in Los Angeles that year. To his surprise, he was accepted. The decision to move to California marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, one that would eventually lead to the creation of Eraserhead and his emergence as one of the most distinctive filmmakers of his generation. David Lynch's reflections. Philadelphia was a huge turning point. It was a place of horror, but also a place of incredible inspiration. Everything I do now, everything I feel, somehow traces back to those years in that city. The first time I saw a painting move in my mind was it. That was the moment everything changed. I realized I didn't have to paint. I could make images move. That's how it all started. Philly was fear. There were nights when I couldn't sleep because the city felt alive with something dark. But that fear, it stayed with me. It found its way into my work. Without Philadelphia, I don't think Eraserhead would exist. Leaving Philadelphia felt like escaping something. I didn't know what was next, but knew I had to leave. But even now, I still dream about that city decades later. Los Angeles, California, 1971 to 1979. In 1971, David Lynch left behind the gritty streets of Philadelphia and moved to Los Angeles after being accepted into the American Film Institute's Center for Advanced Film Studies, AFI. It was a significant turning point in his life. Philadelphia had given him a deep, instinctual understanding of fear, decay, and atmosphere. Still, he was stepping into Hollywood in Los Angeles, where dreams and nightmares coexisted differently. At first, Lynch struggled with the transition. LA was nothing like Philadelphia, sprawling, bright, and strangely artificial. The clean, palm tree-lined streets and relentless sunshine masked an undercurrent of desperation, ambition, and illusion. Lynch wasn't particularly drawn to the glamour of Hollywood, but the city itself fascinated him. It had a kind of eerie perfection, a surface-level normalcy that concealed something darker underneath. At AFI, Lynch finally had access to film equipment, funding, and mentorship. The Institute encouraged experimental filmmaking, which perfectly suited his unique vision. He began developing ideas for short films, but quickly realized that his true passion lay in feature-length storytelling. His first major project at AFI would become Eraserhead, a film that took nearly 5 years to complete. He would define himself as one of the most original voices in cinema. Making Eraserhead. The origins of Eraserhead can be traced directly back to Lynch's experiences in Philadelphia. The film's industrial landscapes, nightmarish tone, and themes of isolation and anxiety were all shaped by his years in that city. Lynch wrote the script while at AFI, inspired by his fears of fatherhood and the surreal horrors of urban decay. With support from AFI, Lynch was given access to resources, but he quickly realized that making a film, especially one as unconventional as Eraserhead, would not be easy. He cast his friend and classmate Jack Nance in the lead role of Henry Spencer, a lonely man navigating a nightmarish industrial world. Nance's tall hair, slow, deliberate movements, and haunted expressions became central to the film's eerie aesthetic. The production was grueling. Lynch and his small crew, including his close collaborators Jack Fisk and cinematographer Frederick Elmes, shot the film over several years, often stopping for months due to a lack of funds. Lynch took on odd jobs to keep the project alive, working as a paper delivery man and living on set for a time. The AFI eventually pulled funding for the film, deeming it too strange, but Lynch refused to give up. He applied for grants, borrowed money from friends, and used every available resource to keep the film moving forward. Life on set. The production of Eraserhead took place on the AFI campus, where Lynch and his small team transformed empty rooms into surreal, nightmarish sets. Lynch's obsessive attention to detail became evident during this period. He meticulously crafted every prop, lighting choice, and sound effect, ensuring the film maintained its uniquely unsettling atmosphere. One of the most famous and mysterious elements of Eraserhead is the baby, a grotesque, inhuman creature that Henry is forced to care for. Lynch never revealed precisely how the baby was created, and its origins remain a closely guarded secret. The creature's unnatural movements and disturbing cries added an extra layer of horror to the film, solidifying its reputation as one of the most unnerving images in cinema history. The film's sound design was just as important as its visuals. Lynch, already fascinated by the role of sound in storytelling, crafted a dense industrial soundscape filled with distant hums, mechanical drones, and sudden bursts of unsettling noise. This immersive, oppressive audio environment became a signature of his work, later influencing films like Blue Velvet and Twin Peaks. Financial struggles and personal sacrifices. As the years dragged on, Lynch's obsession with completing Eraserhead took a toll on his personal life. His all-consuming artistic pursuits had already strained his marriage to Peggy Reavey, and by the time the film was nearing completion, their relationship had deteriorated beyond repair. They divorced in the early 1970s, and Lynch, now a single father, struggled to balance his artistic ambitions with raising his daughter, Jennifer. Money was always an issue. With Eraserhead in limbo, Lynch barely scraped by. At one point, he and Jack Nance lived together in near poverty, surviving on a diet of cheap food and rationing what little money they had left. Despite the hardships, Lynch never considered abandoning the project. He believed in the film entirely, even when no one else did. The cult success of Eraserhead. In 1977, after nearly 5 years of on-and-off production, Eraserhead was finally completed. At first, it struggled to find an audience. It was too strange, disturbing, and unconventional for mainstream theaters. However, it slowly began to develop a following through midnight screenings in Los Angeles and New York. One of the first significant figures to recognize Eraserhead's brilliance was filmmaker Stanley Kubrick, who reportedly called it one of his favorite films, and even screened it for the cast and crew of The Shining as an example of what he wanted to achieve in terms of mood and atmosphere. Kubrick's endorsement helped cement the film's reputation, and soon it became a cult sensation. Critics and audiences struggled to categorize Eraserhead. Some saw it as a horror film, others as a surrealist masterpiece. Its themes of alienation, fatherhood, and existential dread resonated with viewers in a difficult-to-articulate way. Lynch remained deliberately vague about the film's meaning, preferring to let audiences interpret it for themselves. Entering Hollywood. The success of Eraserhead put Lynch on the map. Suddenly, he was no longer just an obscure experimental filmmaker. He was someone to watch. Intrigued by his unique vision, Hollywood executives began reaching out with offers. One of the first to approach Lynch was Mel Brooks, who produced The Elephant Man, 1980. Brooks saw Eraserhead and, despite its bizarre nature, believed Lynch had the perfect sensibility to direct a more traditional narrative film. Lynch, eager for his next challenge, accepted the opportunity. With The Elephant Man, Lynch would enter a new phase of his career, one where he had access to larger budgets, professional actors, and Hollywood's complete machinery. However, he never lost the raw, experimental spirit that had defined his early years. The lessons he learned while struggling to make Eraserhead, resourcefulness, patience, and an obsession with detail would stay with him for the rest of his career. David Lynch's Reflections. Los Angeles was strange. It wasn't like Philly, it didn't have that raw, terrifying energy, but it had its weirdness. Everything was too clean, too perfect. It felt like something was lurking underneath, waiting to break through. AFI was a gift. It gave me the tools I needed to make Eraserhead. But even then I knew that film school wasn't about learning but making things, and Eraserhead was the only thing I wanted to make. We shot that movie for years. Sometimes we'd have to stop for months because we ran out of money. I worked odd jobs. Jack Nance worked odd jobs. But we never gave up. That was the thing. No matter how bad it got, we kept going. The baby, people still ask me about the baby, and I'll never tell. When Eraserhead came out, I didn't know what would happen. I thought no one would ever see it. But then people started showing up. Midnight screenings, weird little theaters, and suddenly it had a life of its own. Stanley Kubrick watching Eraserhead? That was surreal. He saw something in it, something I never even put into words. That was one of the best moments of my life. Part 6. The Elephant Man, 1980 to 1981. By the late 1970s, David Lynch had established himself as a promising but enigmatic filmmaker with Eraserhead. The film's surreal industrial nightmare had attracted a cult following, and its influence began spreading. One of the most surprising admirers of the film was comedy legend Mel Brooks, who had recently founded Brooks Films, a production company dedicated to making more serious films outside of his usual comedic style. Brooks was producing The Elephant Man, a historical drama based on the life of Joseph Merrick, referred to as John Merrick in the film, a severely deformed man who lived in Victorian England. The script, written by Christopher DeVore and Eric Berggren, told the moving story of Merrick's struggles, societal mistreatment, and eventual friendship with Dr. Frederick Trevis, who sought to provide him with a dignified life. Brooks saw Eraserhead and, against all industry expectations, believed that Lynch was the perfect choice to direct The Elephant Man. Despite the stark differences between the two films, Brooks recognized Lynch's ability to craft atmospheric, profoundly human storytelling. When Lynch was called in for a meeting, he was terrified that Brooks would reject him, but instead Brooks warmly embraced him, saying, "You're a madman. I love you." Stepping into Hollywood, Lynch was now facing an entirely new challenge. Until now, he had operated in a world of complete creative control, making Eraserhead on a shoestring budget over several years with a small, dedicated crew. Now he was stepping into Hollywood, directing a film with a sizable budget, professional actors, and an entire production team. He was also working with a major studio, Paramount Pictures, which meant dealing with executives, producers, and industry expectations. However, as an uncredited executive producer, Brooks promised Lynch complete creative freedom. He shielded him from studio interference, famously telling the executives, "If you come onto the set, I will kill you." This allowed Lynch to work in a personal environment, despite being a big-budget Hollywood production. Casting and pre-production. One of the first significant decisions Lynch faced was casting the role of John Merrick. It was an incredibly demanding part. Merrick's severe physical deformities meant that the actor would be unrecognizable under heavy prosthetics, relying solely on body language and voice to convey the character's inner life. The role went to John Hurt, a highly respected British actor known for his powerful performances. Anthony Hopkins was cast as Dr. Frederick Trevis, the surgeon who discovered Merrick and became his advocate. Already an established actor, Hopkins brought a sense of quiet dignity to the role, balancing empathy with a sense of clinical detachment. The film's visual style was another critical element. Lynch insisted on shooting the Elephant Man in black and white, despite concerns from the studio. He felt that the monochrome aesthetic would evoke the Victorian era more effectively and give the film a timeless, dreamlike quality. The decision paid off. The stark contrasts and shadowy cinematography created a haunting atmosphere that perfectly complemented the film's themes. The filming process shooting took place in England, primarily at Shepperton Studios, with location work in London. Lynch meticulously crafted the film's visual world, drawing from his love of classical Hollywood cinema and German Expressionism. He worked closely with cinematographer Freddie Francis, a veteran of British cinema, to achieve the film's distinctive look. One of the biggest challenges was designing Merrick's appearance. Rather than relying on exaggerated or grotesque makeup, Lynch wanted the design to be as accurate as possible to the honest Joseph Merrick. The makeup team studied medical records and historical photographs, crafting a prosthetic design that required hours of application each day for John Hurt. The result was astonishing. Hurt's transformation into Merrick was realistic and profoundly moving. The Elephant Man's sound design was another area where Lynch's unique sensibilities came into play. Though this was a historical drama, he infused the film with unsettling industrial sounds reminiscent of Eraserhead. In particular, the film's opening sequence, a surreal montage depicting Merrick's mother being trampled by an elephant, was pure Lynchian nightmare fuel. This sequence, accompanied by distorted sounds and abstract imagery, was the one part of the film where Lynch allowed his more experimental instincts to take over. Themes and emotional depth. At its core, The Elephant Man was a film about compassion, isolation, and society's cruelty. Lynch was deeply moved by Merrick's story, seeing parallels between Merrick's outsider status and his own experiences as an artist who didn't fit into the mainstream. The film explores the tension between curiosity and exploitation. Trevis rescues Merrick from an abusive freak show, but even in high society, he is still an object of fascination. Lynch subtly depicts this moral complexity, refusing to paint Trevis as a simple savior. Instead, the film questioned whether even well-intentioned people could genuinely see Merrick as an equal rather than a spectacle. One of the most heart-wrenching moments in the film is when Merrick, after enduring years of humiliation and abuse, softly says, "I am not an animal. I am a human being." John Hurt's raw emotion makes this line one of the film's defining moments and one of the most iconic lines in cinema history. Critical and commercial success. When The Elephant Man was released in 1980, it was widely acclaimed. Critics praised Lynch's direction, the performances, and the film's emotional power. Many were shocked that the director of Eraserhead had created something so profoundly moving and accessible, proving that Lynch could work within Hollywood while still maintaining his artistic identity. The film was a box office success, grossing over $26 million, a significant achievement for a black-and-white historical drama. It was nominated for 8 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director, Lynch's first Oscar nomination, Best Actor for John Hurt, and Best Adapted Screenplay. Though it won no Oscars, the film cemented Lynch's reputation as a significant talent in Hollywood. One of The Elephant Man's lasting impacts was its influence on the Academy Awards. At the time, despite the extraordinary work done on John Hurt's transformation, there was no Oscar category for Best Makeup. The outcry over the film's lack of recognition in this area led the Academy to introduce the Best Makeup category in 1981, ensuring that films with groundbreaking prosthetics and effects would receive proper recognition. David Lynch's reflections. When Mel Brooks called me, I thought it was a joke. Why would Mel Brooks want me for this movie? But he saw something in Eraserhead, not the horror, weirdness, or emotion. And that's what The Elephant Man was about. Working with John Hurt was incredible. He was under that makeup for hours daily, but he never complained. He became Merrick. He brought this unbelievable gentleness to the role. I fought for black and white. The studio didn't want it. They thought audiences wouldn't go for it. But to me, the story didn't work in color. It needed that timeless quality. That opening sequence, I wanted something surreal that felt like a dream. People forget, but dreams matter, even in a straightforward film like The Elephant Man. They tell you things reality can't. When John says, "I am not an animal," that moment destroyed me. That was everything the movie was about. Hollywood was different after this. Suddenly, I wasn't just the weird guy who made Eraserhead. I was someone they wanted to work with. It was exciting, but also strange, because I knew that I didn't quite belong there. Part 7. Dune, 1982 to 1984. After The Elephant Man's critical and commercial success, David Lynch found himself in an unexpected position. Once indifferent to the young filmmaker, Hollywood was eager to work with him. Lynch was no longer just an underground artist, a respected director with an Oscar-nominated film. Offers poured in, and among them was an opportunity that, at first glance, seemed both thrilling and impossible. Adapting Dune, Frank Herbert's sprawling, complex sci-fi novel. Lynch had other options. George Lucas even approached him to direct Return of the Jedi, a proposition many filmmakers would have killed for. But Lynch declined, feeling that Star Wars wasn't his world. Then, Italian producer Dino De Laurentiis came forward with a different kind of sci-fi project, an adaptation of Dune, a novel Lynch had never read but was intrigued by. Lynch saw potential in Dune, imagining a surreal, dreamlike epic that could blend the grandiosity of Lawrence of Arabia with the bizarre, nightmarish qualities of his artistic vision. It was a chance to make something massive and ambitious, his version of 2001, A Space Odyssey. So, despite his lack of experience with big-budget filmmaking, Lynch signed on to write and direct what would become his career's most challenging and frustrating project. Adapting the unadaptable from the start, Dune was an overwhelming challenge. Frank Herbert's novel was dense, filled with intricate political conflicts, mystical elements, and an enormous cast of characters. The book's philosophical depth and world-building made translating into a conventional film narrative difficult. Lynch, determined to make the project his own, wrote multiple script drafts, attempting to condense the vast story into a manageable screenplay. His vision for Dune was dark, surreal, and deeply psychological, more focused on the eerie, mystical elements of the story than on traditional space opera action. However, Lynch quickly discovered that working on a major studio film meant compromises. De Laurentiis, while supportive in some ways, was still a producer who wanted commercial success. Universal Pictures, which was financing the film, expected something on the scale of Star Wars, a thrilling adventure that would appeal to mainstream audiences. As Lynch worked on the screenplay, he realized the project was slipping further from his control. The scope of Dune was enormous, massive sets, elaborate costumes, intricate special effects. Unlike Eraserhead or The Elephant Man, where he had complete creative freedom, Lynch now had to answer to studio executives who were wary of his more experimental tendencies. Filming Dune production began in 1983 in Mexico, where elaborate sets were constructed to bring the desert planet of Arrakis to life. The shoot was grueling. The cast and crew endured intense heat, long hours, and an over-complicated production process that stretched the budget to its limits. The cast was a mix of respected actors and newcomers. In his first significant role, Kyle MacLachlan was cast as Paul Atreides, the noble-born protagonist destined to lead a rebellion on Arrakis. Lynch immediately connected to MacLachlan, seeing him as an on-screen surrogate. The two developed a close friendship, and MacLachlan would become one of Lynch's most frequent collaborators. Other actors included Sting as the sadistic Feyd-Rautha, Patrick Stewart as Gurney Halleck, and Jürgen Prochnow as Duke Leto Atreides, The film boasted an impressive lineup, but Lynch constantly battled financial, technical, and creative constraints. One of the biggest challenges was the film's special effects. Dune was made before the widespread use of CGI, meaning that nearly every effect had to be achieved practically. The film's sandworms, enormous, monstrous creatures that roamed the deserts of Arrakis, were created using large-scale miniatures and puppetry. The result was visually impressive for the time but incredibly difficult to execute. Lynch also had ambitious ideas for the film's dream sequences, aiming to incorporate surreal, hallucinatory imagery reflecting Paul Atreides' mystical journey. However, many of these ideas were scaled back or abandoned due to time and budget constraints. Clashes with the studio as production dragged on, tensions between Lynch and the studio increased. Universal wanted a straightforward sci-fi blockbuster while Lynch tried to make something more abstract and poetic. The film's running time became a significant point of contention. Lynch's initial cut was over 3 hours long, but the studio demanded a shorter, more digestible version. Lynch was forced to trim significant portions of the film, removing key character moments and narrative details. Some cuts confused the story, and many of Lynch's original artistic choices were diluted. Despite his best efforts, he was losing control of the film. By the time Dune was completed, Lynch was deeply unhappy with the final product. The studio had taken the film from him in post-production, re-editing scenes and adding a clunky voiceover narration to explain the plot. It was no longer his film, something compromised, something unfinished. Release and Backlash Dune was released in December 1984, and it was an immediate disappointment. Critics found it confusing and poorly paced, with some calling it a disaster. Audiences expecting something in the vein of Star Wars were baffled by its dense mythology and surreal tone. The film underperformed at the box office, failing to recoup its budget and effectively killing any chances of sequels. Lynch, devastated by the experience, disowned the film and refused to take part in extended cuts or director's editions. When the studio released a more extended television version with additional footage, he replaced his name with the infamous Alan Smithee pseudonym, a sign that the director no longer wanted to be associated with the project. Lessons learned. Despite Dune's failure, the experience shaped Lynch as a filmmaker. It was a painful lesson in the realities of working in Hollywood, showing him the dangers of taking on a project that he didn't have complete creative control over. From then on, Lynch vowed never to work on a film without a final cut. He realized that his strength as a filmmaker lay in personal, idiosyncratic storytelling, not in adapting someone else's vision under the constraints of a major studio. Lynch's time with Dune wasn't entirely wasted, though. The film introduced him to Kyle MacLachlan, who would later star in Blue Velvet and Twin Peaks and become one of Lynch's most iconic leading men. Additionally, some of Dune's visual elements, its industrial, oppressive atmosphere and dream sequences, would find their way into his later work. David Lynch's reflections. I should never have done Dune. Looking back, I realized that it wasn't my film. I didn't have control, and when you don't have control, it's a horrible experience. The thing is, I love the world of Dune. I loved the characters, but it was too big. Too much for one movie. And the compromises. So many compromises. The worst part was the editing. The studio took the film and just chopped it up. It wasn't what I wanted. It wasn't what I saw in my head. After Dune, I promised myself that I would never work on a film where I didn't have a final cut. Never again. But you know, something good always comes out of everything. I met Kyle MacLachlan on Dune. That was huge. We worked together on Blue Velvet right after, which was one of my life's best experiences. Despite Dune's disappointment, Lynch didn't retreat. Instead, he doubled down on what he did best, creating deeply personal, original stories. His next film, Blue Velvet, would mark a triumphant return to form, reestablishing him as one of the most visionary filmmakers of his generation. Part 8. Blue Velvet, 1985 to 1986. After Dune's crushing disappointment, David Lynch found himself at a crossroads. The experience had been a painful lesson in the dangers of working within the Hollywood studio system, and he was determined never again to take on a project over which he didn't have complete creative control. He needed to return to something smaller, personal, something that felt like his vision from start to finish. That project would be Blue Velvet, a film that would not only resurrect Lynch's career but also establish him as one of the most distinctive and daring filmmakers of his generation. The genesis of Blue Velvet. Lynch first wrote a version of Blue Velvet in the early 1970s, but it had remained undeveloped for years. The initial idea stemmed from a single image that had lodged itself in his mind, a severed human ear lying in a field. That image alone suggested a mystery, a hidden darkness beneath the surface of everyday life. Lynch was fascinated by the contrast between innocence and corruption, beauty and horror, ideas that had been present in his earlier work but had never been fully explored in a narrative film. Lynch also drew inspiration from his childhood memories of small-town America. He had grown up in picturesque suburban neighborhoods, places that seemed safe and wholesome on the surface. But as Blue Velvet would suggest, there was always something unsettling lurking beneath that idyllic exterior. With this foundation, Lynch crafted a story that blended elements of film noir, psychological horror, and dreamlike surrealism. It was a return to the intimate, nightmarish storytelling that had defined Eraserhead, but with a more refined sense of narrative and character development. Finding the right team unlike Dune, which had been weighed down by studio interference, Blue Velvet was a passion project that Lynch was determined to control. He found an unexpected ally in producer Dino De Laurentiis, the same man who had overseen Dune. Despite their difficulties with the previous film, De Laurentiis still believed in Lynch's talent and agreed to finance Blue Velvet. But under one condition. Lynch had to make the film on a modest budget of $6 million. Lynch accepted without hesitation. The smaller budget meant fewer studio demands and more creative freedom. That was precisely what he wanted. For the lead role of Jeffrey Beaumont, Lynch turned to Kyle MacLachlan, who had played Paul Atreides in Dune. With his clean-cut, boy-next-door looks, MacLachlan was perfect for the part, a seemingly innocent young man who gradually descends into a world of darkness. Lynch cast Isabella Rossellini as Dorothy Valens, the mysterious nightclub singer trapped in an abusive relationship. The daughter of legendary actress Ingrid Bergman and director Roberto Rossellini, Isabella brought a raw vulnerability to the role that made Dorothy one of the most haunting characters in Lynch's filmography. However, the most pivotal casting decision was for the role of Frank Booth, the sadistic, gas-huffing psychopath who dominates the film's underworld. Dennis Hopper, who had spent years struggling with addiction and erratic behavior, was looking for a comeback role. When he read the script, he told Lynch, "I have to play Frank Booth because I am Frank Booth." His performance would go down as one of the most terrifying villains in cinematic history. Shooting Blue Velvet filming took place in Wilmington, North Carolina, a location that perfectly captured the film's eerie, small-town aesthetic. Lynch meticulously crafted every detail, ensuring that Blue Velvet felt like a classic 1950s suburban dreamscape, only to rip that dream apart with moments of shocking violence and sexual menace. The film's central mystery revolves around Jeffrey Beaumont, a college student who returns to his hometown and discovers a severed ear in a field. His curiosity leads him to Dorothy Valens, a tormented singer caught in the grip of Frank Booth, a violent and unpredictable man who subjects her to sadistic abuse. Jeffrey questions his morality and desires as he draws deeper into this hidden world. One of the film's most infamous scenes features Frank Booth assaulting Dorothy while inhaling from an oxygen mask and shouting profane, terrifying phrases. Hopper's performance was so intense that some crew members were visibly disturbed during filming. Lynch, however, was unshaken. He knew that Hopper was delivering something extraordinary. Another key scene, set in Ben's Place's surreal, nightmarish world, features Dean Stockwell as Ben, a bizarre, effeminate drug dealer who lip-syncs to Roy Orbison's In Dreams, while Frank Booth watches in rapturous delight. The sequence, filled with strange lighting and slow, hypnotic movements, is pure Lynch, at once beautiful, unsettling, and utterly unforgettable. Themes and interpretations. Blue Velvet is often described as a film about duality, the surface and the underbelly, light and darkness, innocence and corruption. Jeffrey Beaumont begins the film as an innocent young man, but as he becomes entangled in Dorothy and Frank's world, he is forced to confront his hidden desires. The film also explores themes of voyeurism and power. Jeffrey's initial interest in Dorothy is curiosity, but his decision to spy on her quickly becomes something darker. He is horrified and aroused by what he sees when he steps into her world. Lynch doesn't provide easy answers. He simply presents these conflicting emotions and forces the audience to grapple with them. Music plays a crucial role in the film's atmosphere. The use of Roy Orbison's In Dreams and Bobby Vinton's Blue Velvet creates an ironic contrast between the film's nostalgic, romantic aesthetic and its nightmarish content. The soundtrack serves as a haunting reminder that the past, whether in music, memories, or small-town ideals, is never as innocent as it seems. Critical and commercial reception. When Blue Velvet was released in 1986, it was met with controversy. The film's depiction of sexual violence, particularly Dorothy Vallon's abusive relationship with Frank Booth, shocked audiences and critics alike. Some accused Lynch of exploiting his female lead, while others praised the film for its fearless exploration of trauma and submission. Roger Ebert famously gave the film a negative review, calling it a cruel and dishonest film, and criticizing Lynch for what he saw as an exploitative treatment of Isabella Rossellini. Other critics, however, saw Blue Velvet as a masterpiece, praising its bold storytelling, stunning cinematography, and haunting performances. Despite the controversy, the film became a sleeper hit, earning more than $8 million at the box office, an impressive return for a $6 million indie film. Over time, its reputation grew, and today it is widely considered one of the greatest films of the 1980s. Blue Velvet was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Director, cementing Lynch's status as one of the most innovative filmmakers of his time. Dennis Hopper's performance as Frank Booth became legendary, and he is often cited as one of the greatest movie villains of all time. David Lynch's reflections. With Blue Velvet, I felt free again. After Dune, I knew I had to make something personal, purely me, and that's what Blue Velvet was. That opening shot, the white picket fences, the red roses, the firemen waving, that's how I remembered small-town America. But then you go deeper and you find something else. That's what the movie is about. Frank Booth, Dennis Hopper just became that character. He understood it in a way that scared me. He gave everything in that performance. People didn't know what to make of Blue Velvet at first. Some were horrified, some were in love with it. And I love that. I love it when a movie makes people feel so strongly. A new chapter. With Blue Velvet, Lynch had fully reclaimed his artistic identity. He had proven that he could work within Hollywood without compromising his vision. The film's success paved the way for his next major project, taking his surreal, small-town nightmares to an entirely new level. Twin Peaks. Part 9. Twin Peaks, 1987 to 1992. After the critical and commercial success of Blue Velvet, David Lynch was at a creative high point. He had re-established himself as a director who could blend the eerie and the beautiful, the mysterious and the mundane. But instead of diving straight into another film, Lynch was drawn to a different medium: television. At the time, network television was dominated by formulaic cop dramas, sitcoms, and soap operas. It was not considered a place for actual artistic experimentation. Yet, when Lynch teamed up with TV writer Mark Frost, the two saw an opportunity to do something entirely new. A serialized mystery that would blend elements of small-town Americana with surreal horror, humor, and deeply emotional storytelling. That project became Twin Peaks, and it would change television forever. The birth of Twin Peaks. Lynch and Frost's initial idea for Twin Peaks emerged during conversations. They started with a simple premise: a murder mystery set in a small town, where the crime would unravel a web of secrets hidden beneath the town's seemingly wholesome surface. The central event of the series was the murder of high school homecoming queen Laura Palmer, a beloved and seemingly perfect girl whose death sends shockwaves through the town of Twin Peaks. Lynch and Frost were fascinated by the contrast between appearance and reality, how a city resembling something from a Norman Rockwell painting could hide so much darkness. ABC was intrigued by the project's unique blend of mystery and character-driven storytelling, so it ordered a pilot episode in 1989. Casting the town of Twin Peaks, Lynch's casting choices were critical to Twin Peaks' distinct tone. For the lead role of FBI agent Dale Cooper, he once again turned to Kyle MacLachlan, who had starred in Dune and Blue Velvet. MacLachlan's portrayal of Cooper, a quirky, coffee-loving, pie-obsessed detective with an intuitive, almost supernatural sense of crime-solving, became one of the most iconic characters in TV history. The rest of the cast was an eclectic mix of veteran actors and fresh faces. Michael Ontkean played Sheriff Harry Truman, Cooper's straight-laced local counterpart. Ray Wise and Grace Zabriskie delivered haunting performances as Laura Palmer's grieving parents, while Mädchen Amick, Dana Ashbrook, and Sherilyn Fenn played the town's troubled teenagers. The most fascinating casting choice was Cheryl Lee as Laura Palmer. Hired initially to play Laura's corpse in the pilot, Lynch was so taken with her presence that he expanded her role, giving her an ethereal, haunting presence throughout the series. The iconic pilot episode. When Twin Peaks premiered on April 8, 1990, it was unlike anything television audiences had ever seen. The pilot opened with the discovery of Laura Palmer's body, wrapped in plastic on the shore of a river. The town's residents, police officers, high school friends, and parents reacted with shock and grief. Still, as the investigation began, it became clear that Laura's life was far more complicated than anyone realized. Agent Cooper's arrival in Twin Peaks brought an offbeat energy to the show. His fascination with the town's simple pleasures like cherry pie and damn fine coffee contrasted with the growing darkness of the mystery. Lynch infused the pilot with his signature dreamlike touches, long, lingering shots of the woods, unsettling music, and bizarre moments of surreal humor. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Critics hailed Twin Peaks as revolutionary, and viewers were captivated by its unique blend of mystery, melodrama, and Lynchian weirdness. The show's first season became a cultural phenomenon, drawing millions of viewers and sparking endless speculation about who killed Laura Palmer. The rise of a cultural phenomenon. Following the pilot's success, ABC ordered a 7-episode first season. The show's blend of murder mystery, supernatural elements, and quirky small-town charm proved irresistible. Lynch directed several episodes himself, infusing them with haunting, otherworldly imagery. The show's dream sequences, particularly the infamous Red Room scenes, became some of the most iconic moments in television history. In these scenes, Cooper experiences visions of a backward-speaking dwarf, a ghostly Laura Palmer, and cryptic messages hinting at deeper, supernatural forces. Angelo Badalamenti's score added another layer of atmosphere to the series. His dreamy, jazz-infused soundtrack perfectly captured the show's mix of warmth and unease. The Twin Peaks theme song became instantly recognizable with its slow, melancholic melody. By the time the first season ended, Twin Peaks had become a full-blown cultural event. Fans obsessed over every detail, analyzing clues, theorizing about the killer, and imitating Cooper's love for coffee and pie. The show even influenced fashion, with Sherilyn Fenn's Audrey Horne becoming a style icon. At the 1990 Emmy Awards, Twin Peaks received 14 nominations, including Best Drama Series and Best Actor for Kyle MacLachlan. Though it didn't win Best Drama, its impact was undeniable. TV was no longer just a disposable medium for predictable storytelling. Lynch had proven that television could be art. The downfall, pressure to solve the mystery. Despite the success of Season 1, trouble was brewing behind the scenes. ABC, eager to capitalize on the show's popularity, ordered a second season with a longer episode count. Lynch and Frost, however, had never intended for Twin Peaks to reveal Laura Palmer's killer so soon. They wanted the murder mystery to remain an ongoing thread, with the show evolving beyond it into a deeper exploration of the town's secrets. But the network had other ideas. Under immense pressure from executives and audiences, Lynch and Frost were forced to resolve the mystery early in Season 2. In Episode 14, Laura Palmer's killer was revealed to be Leland Palmer, her father, who had been possessed by an ancient evil entity known as B.O.B. Lynch directed the episode, which was one of the most harrowing in television history. Ray Wise's performance as the tormented Leland was both heartbreaking and terrifying. However, once the mystery was solved, the show struggled to find its footing. Without Laura's murder driving the plot, Twin Peaks meandered into bizarre subplots that lacked the intensity of the first season. Ratings began to drop, and Lynch, frustrated by the show's direction, became less involved. Lynch's return and the end of Twin Peaks. As ratings declined, ABC announced that Twin Peaks would be canceled. Lynch, realizing the show needed a strong ending, returned to direct the final episode. What he delivered was one of television's most shocking and disturbing finales. The episode, set mainly in the supernatural Red Room, saw Cooper confront his doppelganger and ultimately become possessed by B.O.B. The final shot, Cooper smashing his head against a mirror, laughing maniacally as he asks, "How's Annie?" left audiences in stunned silence. There was no resolution, no happy ending, just a lingering dread. The show was officially canceled in 1991, leaving fans devastated. What had started as a groundbreaking cultural phenomenon had ended in chaos. The aftermath. Twin Peaks, Fire Walk with Me. Though Twin Peaks was over, Lynch wasn't finished with Laura Palmer's story. In 1992, he directed Twin Peaks, Fire Walk with Me, a prequel film exploring Laura's final days before her murder. The film was far darker and more brutal than the TV series, delving into Laura's trauma, drug use, and descent into despair. When the film premiered at the Cannes Film Festival, critics who had expected a more traditional continuation of the show booed it. Audiences were divided. Many found it too bleak, while others felt it deepened the Twin Peaks mythology. Over time, Fire Walk with Me gained a cult following, and is now considered an essential part of the Twin Peaks saga. David Lynch's reflections. Twin Peaks was a miracle. It came out of nowhere and was the most exciting thing in the world for a while. But then the suits got involved. And once they forced us to solve Laura's murder, the heart of the show was gone. That final episode, I knew I had to take it somewhere darker. People thought there would be a happy ending, but I knew Twin Peaks wasn't about happy endings. Fire Walk with Me was important to me. People initially didn't get it, but that movie is Laura's story. It's what the show was always about. A legacy that endures. Though Twin Peaks ended in 1991, its influence never faded. It paved the way for shows like The X-Files, Lost, and Breaking Bad, proving that television could be cinematic, surreal, and deeply emotional. Decades later, Twin Peaks would return in a way no one expected. Part 10. Lost Highway, 1997 to 2001. By the mid-1990s, David Lynch was at another crossroads in his career. Twin Peaks had been both a triumph and a disappointment. Its first season was a cultural sensation, but its second season suffered from network interference and declining ratings. The Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, 1992. Prequel film was also criticized upon release, though it would later find a devoted cult following. For Lynch, the early 90s had been a time of reflection and creative frustration. He directed several short films and worked on various scripts, but none came to fruition. The Hollywood landscape was changing. His surreal, dreamlike approach to storytelling seemed at odds with the blockbuster-heavy, fast-paced nature of the industry. But Lynch was never one to chase trends. Instead, he went deeper into his subconscious, exploring ideas that felt right to him, no matter how strange or unsettling. Out of this period of creative searching emerged Lost Highway, a film that would shift Lynch's storytelling approach and set the stage for his later works like Mulholland Drive and Inland Empire. The birth of Lost Highway. The inspiration for Lost Highway came from multiple sources. Lynch had long been fascinated by psychological fragmentation. Characters who are not who they seem, exist in shifting realities, and may not even recognize themselves. The film was also heavily influenced by the O.J. Simpson trial, which dominated media coverage in the mid-1990s. Lynch was intrigued by the idea of a man committing an unthinkable crime and then seemingly disassociating from his actions. Working with co-writer Barry Gifford, author of Wild at Heart, Lynch developed Lost Highway as a neo-noir psychological thriller drenched in surrealism and existential horror. The story, which plays with identity, time loops, and reality shifts, follows a jazz musician named Fred Madison, played by Bill Pullman, who is tormented by mysterious videotapes appearing at his door. After being accused of murdering his wife, Fred inexplicably transforms into a young mechanic named Pete Dayton, played by Balthazar Getty. Pete lives an entirely different life, but the two storylines eventually converge in a nightmarish spiral of violence, deception, and eerie doppelgangers. The phrase Lost Highway, which became the film's title, resonated deeply with Lynch. It suggested a road that disappears into the unknown, a perfect metaphor for the film's fractured identity and existential dread themes. The look and sound of Lost Highway. Visually, Lost Highway departed from Twin Peaks' warm, nostalgic hues and Blue Velvet's carefully composed surrealism. Instead, the film leaned into darkness, both literal and metaphorical. Cinematographer Peter Deming helped Lynch craft a world filled with deep shadows, ominous lighting, and unsettlingly long takes that created an almost hypnotic sense of dread. The film's sound design was just as crucial to its unsettling atmosphere. Lynch, always deeply involved in the soundscapes of his movies, worked closely with composer Angelo Badalamenti and industrial rock artist Trent Reznor of Nine Inch Nails. The result was a soundtrack that blended jazz, eerie ambient noise, and aggressive rock, perfectly matching the film's chaotic descent into madness. Including songs by Marilyn Manson, David Bowie, and Rammstein, added to the film's raw, nightmarish energy. The mysterious villains. The Mystery Man and Mr. Eddie, too, of Lost Highway's most unforgettable elements are its villains, who embody Lynch's fascination with unknowable evil. The Mystery Man, Robert Blake. This ghostly, pale-faced figure is one of the most unsettling characters in Lynch's filmography. He appears at a party telling Fred that they've met before, then proceeds to prove his omnipresence by phone conversation with Fred, while standing directly before him. The Mystery Man's existence is never fully explained, making him all the more terrifying. He seems to be a harbinger of doom, a manifestation of guilt, or perhaps something even darker. Mr. Eddie, Robert Loggia. The other dominant force of malevolence in Lost Highway is Mr. Eddie, a violent gangster with a sadistic streak. At first, he appears almost comically exaggerated, but as the film progresses, his interactions become more and more terrifying. His brutal, unprovoked attack on a tailgating driver serves as a chilling reminder of Lynch's obsession with sudden, chaotic violence. These two figures, one otherworldly and one hyperreal, embody Lynch's two primary types of horror, the supernatural and the all-too-human. The Puzzle of Identity. At its core, Lost Highway is a film about identity, how it can be manipulated, erased, and rewritten. The central mystery of Fred Madison's transformation into Pete Dayton is never explicitly explained. Is it a literal supernatural event, a psychological breakdown, a metaphor for guilt and denial? Lynch refuses to provide easy answers, allowing viewers to draw their conclusions. What's clear, however, is that Lost Highway operates on dream logic. Time folds in on itself. The past and present blur together. Characters swap faces and names. The film rejects conventional storytelling structures, creating an experience that feels more like a descent into the subconscious than a traditional narrative. Release and reception. Lost Highway premiered at the Sundance Film Festival in January 1997 before receiving a wider release. Unlike Blue Velvet, which had generated immediate critical acclaim, Lost Highway was met with confusion and mixed reviews. Some critics dismissed it as incoherent, self-indulgent, and frustratingly opaque. Others, however, recognized its brilliance, praising its haunting atmosphere, unforgettable imagery, and fearless approach to storytelling. While the film underperformed at the box office, grossing only around $3.8 million in the US, it quickly developed a cult following. Lynch's fans embraced its ambiguity, nightmarish tone, and refusal to adhere to traditional narrative conventions. Over time, it has come to be seen as one of his most important works, a precursor to both Mulholland Drive and Inland Empire, films that would further explore themes of fractured identity and nonlinear storytelling. David Lynch's reflections. I loved working on Lost Highway. I had this idea of a man who becomes someone else, and I didn't want to explain it. I wanted people to feel it, not analyze it. The phrase Lost Highway really got to me. It's like when you're driving, suddenly you don't know where you are anymore. That's what the movie is about. Robert Blake is the mystery man. He just brought something terrifying. That scene at the party, it still gives me chills. People didn't get Lost Highway at first, but it's a film that works on a deeper level. You're not supposed to solve it. You're supposed to live inside it. A bridge to Mulholland. Drive Lost Highway wasn't a commercial success, but solidified Lynch's commitment to exploring dreamlike, fragmented narratives. Many of the ideas and stylistic choices he experimented with in this film would later be refined in Mulholland Drive, 2001, one of his most celebrated works. Lynch had once again proven that he was an artist willing to take risks regardless of how his films were received. He wasn't interested in pleasing studios or mainstream audiences, but in making films that felt true to his vision. And with Lost Highway, he had taken another step deeper into the unknown. Part 11, Mulholland Drive, 2001 to 2002. By the late 1990s, David Lynch was once again in transition. His previous film, Lost Highway, 1997, had been a bold, fragmented neo-noir that divided audiences and critics alike. Some hailed it as a masterpiece of dreamlike storytelling. Others dismissed it as impenetrable. Regardless of its mixed reception, it reinforced Lynch's fascination with identity, duality, and Hollywood's dark underbelly. In this period, Lynch embarked on what would become Mulholland Drive, a film that would not only revive his career but also cement his place as one of the greatest filmmakers of his generation. What began as a television pilot destined for network TV would eventually morph into one of the most enigmatic and celebrated films of the 21st century. Origins, a TV pilot that went nowhere. Lynch's initial vision for Mulholland Drive was as a television series. Inspired by his experiences working on Twin Peaks, he conceived a mystery set in Los Angeles, blending Hollywood glamour with eerie, nightmarish elements. The idea was to create an ongoing story like Twin Peaks, where characters and subplots would evolve over time. In 1999, ABC agreed to fund the pilot, and Lynch began assembling his cast. Naomi Watts, then a relatively unknown actress, was chosen to play Betty, a wide-eyed, aspiring actress who arrives in Los Angeles with dreams of stardom. Laura Elena Herring was cast as Rita, an amnesiac woman with a dark past. The chemistry between the two actresses would become one of the film's most compelling elements. Lynch shot the pilot, incorporating many of his signature stylistic touches: mysterious dialogue, eerie silences, and cryptic symbols. However, when ABC executives viewed the final product, they were unimpressed. They found it too slow, strange, and ambiguous for network television. Lynch was devastated. The project was effectively dead, and it seemed like Mulholland Drive would never see the light of day. A second chance, from TV to film. Despite the rejection, Lynch couldn't let go of the idea. He believed there was something special in what he had shot, but he needed to find a way to turn it into a feature film. In a stroke of luck, French film company Studio Canal stepped in, offering Lynch additional funding to expand the pilot into a movie. Seizing the opportunity, Lynch returned to the material and rewrote the story in a burst of creativity, adding new scenes that would transform the project from a standard mystery into something far more surreal and profound. The most significant change was the addition of the film's final third, a drastic shift in tone and narrative that reframed everything that had come before it. A story of duality and dreams. The final version of Mulholland Drive is divided into two distinct sections. 1. The Dream. The first two-thirds of the film follows Betty, Naomi Watts, a fresh-faced actress who arrives in Los Angeles filled with optimism. She befriends Rita, Laura Elena Herring, an amnesiac woman trying to uncover her identity after surviving a car accident on Mulholland Drive. Together, they navigate the mysteries of Hollywood, encountering cryptic figures, unsettling auditions, and ominous warnings about powerful forces at play. 2. The Nightmare of Reality. Everything shifts in the film's final act. Betty is now Diane, a failed actress consumed by jealousy and despair. Rita is now Camilla, a successful star who has rejected Diane in favor of another lover. The Hollywood dream is shattered, revealing a story of obsession, betrayal, and regret. The transition between these two realities is one of the most shocking and discussed moments in Lynch's filmography. It transforms the film from a neo-noir mystery into an existential horror story about identity, desire, and the brutal nature of Hollywood. The blue box and the key to interpretation. One of the film's most mysterious elements is the blue box, a small object that appears in both the dream and reality portions of the film. In the dream, Betty and Rita discover a strange blue key and a mysterious blue box that seems to absorb them into another reality. When Diane wakes up in the film's second half, the blue box is gone, but the blue key remains, suggesting that it represents the threshold between illusion and truth. What the blue box truly symbolizes is left open to interpretation. Some believe it represents Diane's fractured psyche, with the dream world collapsing once she opens it. Others see it as a portal between parallel realities. As with much of Lynch's work, there is no single answer, only a lingering sense of mystery. Silencio, the most haunting scene. One of the most unforgettable sequences in Mulholland Drive is the Club Silencio scene. Late in the film, Betty and Rita visit a strange nightclub where a magician repeatedly tells the audience that everything they hear is an illusion. No hey banda. There is no band. Yet, the emotions evoked by the performance are real. The scene serves as a metaphor for the entire film. Just as the audience in Club Silencio is manipulated into believing in something that isn't real, so is the viewer of Mulholland Drive. Lynch tells us that cinema, like dreams, is both an illusion and a compelling experience. A masterclass in acting, Naomi Watts' breakthrough performance. At the heart of Mulholland Drive is Naomi Watts' extraordinary performance. She begins as Betty, radiating warmth and optimism, only to transform into Diane, a woman consumed by bitterness and self-loathing. The shift is devastating, showcasing Watts' ability to convey innocence and profound despair. One of the most striking moments in the film is the audition scene, where Betty delivers a mesmerizingly seductive performance in contrast to her earlier naivete. This scene encapsulates Lynch's fascination with performance, how identity can shift depending on context. Release and critical acclaim. Mulholland Drive premiered at the Cannes Film Festival in May 2001, receiving a rapturous response. Lynch won the Best Director award, sharing the honor with Joel Cohen for The Man Who Wasn't There. Upon its release, Mulholland Drive was hailed as a masterpiece. Critics praised its hypnotic storytelling, haunting atmosphere, and willingness to embrace ambiguity. Roger Ebert, who had been critical of Blue Velvet, called it one of the year's best films. Over time, its reputation only grew. In 2016, a BBC poll of film critics ranked Mulholland Drive as the most excellent film of the 21st century. It has since been studied, analyzed, and debated endlessly, with new interpretations emerging yearly. David Lynch's reflections. The fact that this started as a TV pilot and became something else, it's like a happy accident. And sometimes accidents give you the best things. I don't think you're ever supposed to fully solve Mulholland Drive. It's a feeling, an experience. It's about Hollywood dreams, but also Hollywood nightmares. Naomi Watts, what she did in this film is just unbelievable. She went all the way with it. The Club Silencio scene is important. It tells you everything, but it also tells you nothing. That's the mystery. A film that defined a generation. With Mulholland Drive, Lynch had not only rebounded from the struggles of Lost Highway, he had created what many consider his most excellent film. It was a meditation on Hollywood, identity, love, and loss. It was terrifying, beautiful, and utterly unforgettable. It was, in every sense, a David Lynch film. Part 12. Inland Empire and Beyond, 2002 to present. By the early 2000s, David Lynch had firmly established himself as one of the most visionary filmmakers in history. With Mulholland Drive, 2001, he delivered a cinematic masterpiece that would go on to be hailed as the most excellent film of the 21st century. However, rather than using that momentum to make another traditional film, Lynch took an entirely different path that would push his artistic instincts into even more abstract and experimental territory. This new chapter in his career would be defined by Inland Empire, 2006, a 3-hour surrealist odyssey that would test the limits of storytelling, filmmaking technology, and audience patience. At the same time, Lynch expanded his creative pursuits beyond film, focusing on painting, music, and his lifelong passion for transcendental meditation, the making of Inland Empire. Unlike Lynch's previous films, which were carefully scripted before production, Inland Empire was created organically. Lynch had no finished script when he began shooting. He simply had ideas, images, and characters he wanted to explore. He described the process as finding the film while making it. writing scenes as he went along and allowing the story to unfold unpredictably. The film's central figure is Nikki Grace, played by Laura Dern in what many consider the most outstanding performance of her career. Nikki is an actress who lands a role in a mysterious film called On High and Blue Tomorrows. As she delves into her character, the boundaries between reality, fiction, and dreams dissolve. She becomes lost in a labyrinth of shifting identities, eerie visions, and unexplained horrors. Lynch shot Inland Empire entirely on digital video, something he had never done before. Inspired by the freedom of shooting without the constraints of traditional film, he embraced the raw, grainy look of digital footage, believing it added to the film's nightmarish, unstable atmosphere. The film also incorporated footage Lynch had shot years earlier and unsettling scenes featuring actors wearing grotesque rabbit masks. This motif first appeared in a series of short films Lynch had made called Rabbits. These disconnected fragments gradually came together to form Inland Empire, a film that many consider to be Lynch's most abstract and challenging work. If Mulholland Drive played with identity and reality in an unsettling but structured way, the Inland Empire completely abandoned the structure. The film operates on pure dream logic, jumping between locations, timelines, and characters with little warning or explanation. Some of the film's key themes include the horror of Hollywood. Like Mulholland Drive, Inland Empire explores the entertainment industry's dark side. Nikki Grace's descent into madness mirrors how Hollywood consumes and discards its stars. Fractured identity. As Nikki becomes entangled in her role, she loses her sense of self. She shifts between different realities, unsure of who she truly is. A theme Lynch has explored before, but never to this extreme. Fear and the unknown. The film is filled with moments of deep unease. Figures appearing in shadows, distorted faces, strange monologues spoken in cryptic languages. Lynch heightens this fear by refusing to provide context, making the audience feel as lost as Nikki. Release and reception. Inland Empire premiered at the Venice Film Festival in 2006. Lynch famously campaigned for Laura Dern's Oscar nomination by standing on a Los Angeles street corner with a cow and a sign that read, "For your consideration, Laura Dern." Despite its ambition, the Inland Empire was divisive. Some critics hailed it as a bold, nightmarish masterpiece, while others found it frustratingly impenetrable. Audiences accustomed to Lynch's earlier work struggled with its lack of a straightforward narrative. It was his most polarizing film and one of his most uncompromising. Unlike Mulholland Drive, which grew in stature over time, the Inland Empire remained on the fringes. It was admired but rarely revisited, an unsettling experience that even Lynch's most devoted fans found challenging to endure more than once. Lynch's shift away from filmmaking. After the Inland Empire, Lynch's relationship with cinema changed. The intense process of making the film, combined with his growing love for painting and music, led him to step away from traditional filmmaking for nearly a decade. Instead, he focused on other artistic endeavors. Painting. Lynch returned to his first love, visual art. His often dark and surreal paintings reflected the same dreamlike quality as his films. Music. He began releasing his music, blending blues, industrial sounds, and eerie spoken word into hauntingly atmospheric albums like Crazy Clown Time, 2011, and The Big Dream, 2013. Transcendental meditation. A longtime advocate of TM, Lynch became one of its most prominent public figures, establishing the David Lynch Foundation to promote meditation in schools, prisons, and needy communities. For years, it seemed like Lynch might never make another film. When asked about returning to filmmaking, he often responded that he was frustrated at the industry's shift toward digital streaming and its lack of interest in funding experimental projects. The return of Twin Peaks, 2017. Then, in 2017, Lynch shocked the world by returning to his most famous creation, Twin Peaks. Rather than simply revisiting the original show, Lynch and Mark Frost crafted something radically different. Twin Peaks: The Return, an 18-hour surreal odyssey that defied every expectation. A meditation on time and memory. Instead of nostalgia, Lynch delivered something stranger and more profound. The show was less about solving mysteries and more about exploring the passage of time, loss, and the nature of reality. Agent Cooper's evolution. Kyle MacLachlan delivered a masterful performance, playing three versions of Cooper: his classic self, his sinister doppelganger Mr. C, and Dougie Jones, a childlike, barely conscious man navigating the modern world. The most haunting hour of television, Episode 8 of The Return, was an experimental, nearly wordless masterpiece that explored the origins of evil, nuclear power, and the birth of the show's main villain, Biob. Critics hailed it as one of the most significant episodes of television ever made. When Twin Peaks: The Return concluded, audiences were stunned. Its final moments, a terrifying, ambiguous sequence involving Laura Palmer and Agent Cooper, suggested that the cycle of mystery and horror would never truly end. Lynch's legacy and the future. Since Twin Peaks: The Return, Lynch has remained active in art, music, and daily weather reports on YouTube. Though rumors of new projects surface occasionally, he has not committed to another film. Still, his influence is everywhere. Filmmakers like Denis Villeneuve, Ari Aster, and Jordan Peele cite him as an inspiration. His ability to blend beauty and horror, dreams and reality, continues to shape modern storytelling. David Lynch's Reflections. I don't know if I'll make another film. The world of cinema has changed, but I still have ideas and you never know when the right one might come. Inland Empire was about getting lost in a role, in a world, in yourself. I didn't plan it. I just followed where it led. The best stories are the ones that keep you thinking. You don't need to explain everything. You need to feel it. A dream that never ends. David Lynch's career has been defined by risk-taking, mystery, and an unshakable commitment to artistic freedom. From Eraserhead to Twin Peaks. The Return, he has consistently pushed the boundaries of storytelling, refusing to conform to expectations. Whether or not he ever makes another film, his work remains timeless, an invitation to step into a world that is both beautiful and terrifying, logical and impossible, where dreams and nightmares coexist. Because, as Lynch himself might say, the mystery keeps us alive. The art life and beyond. For David Lynch, art has never been about just one medium. While best known as a filmmaker, his creative world extends beyond cinema. From his earliest years of painting in Philadelphia to later experiments in digital film, music, and sculpture, Lynch has always embraced the art life, a philosophy of total creative immersion. This final chapter explores Lynch's artistic evolution outside of film, his deep commitment to transcendental meditation, and the enduring impact of his work. The art life. Lynch as a painter and sculptor. Before he was a filmmaker, Lynch was a painter. His earliest artistic ambitions were not in Hollywood but in the world of fine arts, where he envisioned a career as a painter who occasionally dabbled in experimental film. While cinema eventually took center stage, his passion for painting never faded. Lynch's paintings are as surreal and unsettling as his films, dark, textured, and often grotesque. His canvases are filled with strange figures, cryptic phrases scrawled across thick layers of paint, and eerie, dreamlike landscapes. Many of his works feature mixed media, incorporating wood, metal, and other materials to give them a raw, sculptural quality. Some of his most well-known pieces include Bob's Second Dream, a chaotic abstract painting with disturbing imagery reminiscent of Eraserhead. Suddenly, My House Became a Tree of Sores, a haunting mixed media work that, like his films, evokes both humor and horror. His series of matchstick drawings, delicate, detailed works created by burning matchsticks and embedding them into canvas. Lynch's paintings from Los Angeles to Paris have been exhibited in galleries worldwide. While his films operate within structured narratives, even if they are unconventional, his paintings allow him absolute freedom. No budget constraints, no actors, no limitations other than his imagination. In addition to painting, Lynch has explored sculpture, installation art, and photography. His sculptural work often involves industrial materials, welded metal, crumbling plaster, and found objects, creating pieces that feel like artifacts from a forgotten world. Transcendental meditation and inner exploration. One of the most significant forces in Lynch's life is transcendental meditation, TM. He was introduced to the practice in the 1970s and credited it with unlocking his creativity and maintaining his inner peace. TM, a form of silent mantra meditation, is practiced for 20 minutes twice daily. For Lynch, it is not just a relaxation technique, but a way to access what he calls the unified field, a place of pure creativity where ideas emerge effortlessly. In 2005, Lynch founded the David Lynch Foundation, an organization dedicated to bringing transcendental meditation to schools, veterans, and people suffering from trauma. He has spent years promoting TM as a tool for mental clarity, artistic inspiration, and overall well-being. Lynch's belief in the power of meditation is reflected in his creative process. He often speaks about ideas coming to him fully formed, as if emerging from the subconscious. He doesn't force ideas, he waits for them to arrive, much like dreams. This approach has shaped his films, where logic takes a backseat to feeling, intuition, and emotion. Music and sound design. Lynch as a composer. In addition to his film and visual artwork, Lynch made a name for himself as a musician. His albums, Crazy Clown Time, 2011, and The Big Dream, 2013, are moody, atmospheric works that blend blues, electronic distortion, and surreal spoken-word poetry. His voice, often filtered through layers of effects, sounds otherworldly, creating a sonic landscape that feels like an extension of his filmic universe. Lynch's music is heavily influenced by 1950s rock and roll, industrial noise, and eerie ambient textures. He has collaborated with artists like Krista Bell and Angelo Badalamenti, creating soundscapes that evoke the haunting beauty of Twin Peaks and Eraserhead. Beyond his solo work, Lynch's approach to sound design in his films is legendary. To create unease, he often uses droning noises, industrial hums, and strange, distant echoes. This signature style is evident in Eraserhead, where the film's soundscape is as integral as its visuals, and Twin Peaks, where the low-frequency rumbling of the Black Lodge adds to its sense of dread. Lynch's legacy, the dream that never ends. David Lynch's influence on film, television, and art is immeasurable. His work has inspired generations of filmmakers, musicians, and visual artists. Influence on filmmakers. Many contemporary directors cite Lynch as a significant influence, including Denis Villeneuve, Blade Runner 2049 Dune, known for his slow, atmospheric tension and surreal imagery. Ari Aster, Hereditary Midsommar, incorporates Lynchian dread and dream logic into horror. Jordan Peele, Get Out, Nope, uses Lynchian techniques to blur the line between reality and nightmare. Lynch's ability to create a sense of mystery, where the audience doesn't need to understand everything but must feel it, has shaped modern storytelling. Cultural impact beyond cinema, Lynch's influence extends to literature, music, and fashion. His aesthetic, 1950s nostalgia mixed with nightmarish horror, has become a recognizable artistic style. The phrase Lynchian is now used to describe anything that blends the mundane with the surreal, the beautiful with the terrifying. His work has also been referenced in countless TV shows: The Simpsons, Stranger Things, The X-Files, music videos, and even advertising campaigns that seek to capture his eerie, dreamlike atmosphere. The mystery continues. Will Lynch make another film? For years, fans have wondered if Lynch will ever direct another feature film. After Twin Peaks: The Return, 2017, many assumed he was done with filmmaking, content to focus on painting, music, and meditation. However, rumors persist. Lynch has hinted at one more idea that he might explore, and in 2022, reports surfaced that he was working on a new project titled Unrecorded Night, also known as Wisteria. While details remain vague, many believe that Lynch has at least one more story to tell. Whether or not he returns to the director's chair, his legacy is already cemented. His films continue to be studied, dissected, and admired. His impact on storytelling, atmosphere, and the power of dreams remains unparalleled. David Lynch's reflections. I don't think art should give you answers. I think it should make you dream. The world is a mysterious place, and if you look closely, you will start to see the patterns and the connections, but you don't always understand them, and that's okay. Filmmaking, painting, music, it's all the same thing. It's all about ideas. You get an idea and you follow it, and if you're lucky, it leads you somewhere beautiful and strange. People ask me what my films mean, and I always say, what do they mean to you? Because that's the real answer. Conclusion: living the art life. David Lynch's journey from a young painter in Philadelphia to one of the most influential directors of all time has been defined by a singular philosophy: follow the ideas, embrace the mystery, and never compromise your vision. His films, paintings, and music are not just artistic works, they are invitations into another world, a world where time loops back on itself, where reality bends and breaks, beauty and terror coexist. Lynch himself remains an enigma. At 78, he still wakes up early, drinks coffee, meditates, and creates. Whether he ever makes another film or not, his legacy is secure. His work will continue haunting, inspiring, and challenging audiences for generations. Because in the world of David Lynch, the dream never truly ends.